Thank you, Dr. Pavlos. Bella Leonard. Where are you, Bella? Come up here, darling. Up here, next to me, on the stage. You didn't know that you were going to be introduced, did you? See, they didn't tell the audience that Pavlos was going to introduce me, and I was going to introduce you. I'm very pleased to meet you. Am I Kate's friend?
Yeah.
What's that got to do with anything?
Sorry. Oh, well, Kate told me she knew you, so. Wagner?
Kate?
Wagner?
Kate Wagner?
Mm-hmm.
Would Kate Wagner be the one who asked me to return your water bottle to you? Subject of tonight's talk is chivalry. Returning a water bottle to someone from 1,500 miles away, someone that you don't even know. Well, do I need to talk about chivalry anymore? I think we're done here. Yes, I do know Kate Wagner. She's a graduate of the Chesterton Academy in the Twin Cities, the one that I helped get started. And then she's a graduate of Wyoming Catholic College, and now she's back at Chesterton Academy teaching for us. Is that great or what? Yeah, why would you forget your water bottle? We're talking about memory tonight. There are these two older couples, and one couple was visiting the other, and the two women went into the kitchen, and the two gentlemen were sitting in the living room talking, and the one says to the other, we went to the best restaurant the other night. It was just great, really good food, wasn't expensive, nice atmosphere, it had everything going for it. It was just really great. The other one says, what was the name of it? He goes, what? What was the name of the restaurant? It was, what was it? It was, the name of the restaurant, it was, okay, what are those flowers, the red flowers with the thorns on the stem? Rose? Yeah, Rose. Rose! What was the name of that restaurant we went to? So Dr. Virginia apologized to me that she wouldn't be at the lecture here tonight. And I apologize to her for what I'm about to say about her. So I stumbled into her ethics class yesterday. And she jumped up with just a squeal of recognition when she saw me. And then the smile disappeared from her face as she had realized that she had no idea who I was. And ironically, the topic that they were discussing was courtesy. And I really did enjoy listening to the discussion. The students, you guys did a terrific job. You were articulate and confident, and were just drawing great things from the text that you were considering, and I was deeply impressed. But I think the thing that struck me the most was the many, many lost opportunities to quote Chesterton as you discussed each item. But I had to, sit still. I was just a visitor, and the topic was courtesy after all. But you were talking about courtesy. I thought, well, you should bring up Chesterton's book on St. Francis, where he talks about St. Francis was known for his courtesy, and the very word courtesy has inside of it the word court. In other words, courtesy is courtly behavior, not the court of law or the court of tennis or basketball, but the court of a king. And Chesterton says courtesy is literally treating everyone as if they are a king. And then, of course, that would have been a great opportunity to bring that up, and I was just shocked that no one did. And then the term courtesy is in the word courting, and it was brought up about what a gentleman goes through in courting a woman, and someone pointed out a difference from the caveman style of courting. And some other students were wondering what that meant, and it's a reference to the old cartoons of the caveman hitting the cave woman over the head with a club and dragging her to his cave by her hair. And it's sort of a less romantic view of courting. But it was what people thought. People really were trained to think that that's the way primitive people did the whole love thing. And Chesterton points out in his book, The Everlasting Man, that there's absolutely zero evidence that ever happened. That's based on pure speculation. There's not a shred of evidence that Mr. and Mrs. Early Caveman had such a ritual. In fact, the only thing we know about their behavior, there's only one thing we know about their behavior, and that's that they were artists. We still have the paintings on the walls of the cave to prove that that's what they did. They were artists. That's the human thing that they did. It's what set them apart from the beasts. Chesterton says art is the signature of man. And then we talked about how limits make you free. And I said, okay, they're going to quote Chesterton now for sure. How Chesterton says that Catherine, doctrine, and discipline may be walls, but they're the walls of a playground. And within those limits, we are entirely free. And yet no one did it. And then someone else talked about how we need courtesy because everyone is an obstacle. Kind of a low view of mankind, but I think he was complaining about the fact that everything seems to be inconvenient. And of course, the Chesterton line, which I was waiting for him to say, was that an inconvenience is only an adventure, wrongly considered, whereas an adventure is an inconvenience rightly considered. When you spent your 3 weeks in the mountains, it was extremely inconvenient. But you weren't thinking of it that way. You were realizing that you were on a great adventure because you had the right attitude. And that's the same attitude you should have in a traffic jam in Seattle, is that this is a great adventure. And someday I will slay each of these dragons. And then gratitude came up, and I was, of course, waiting for someone to say Chesterton's line that thanks is the highest form of thought, and that gratitude is, you said gratitude is something where you need another person. And Chesterton's line, again from the St. Francis book, that the worst moment for an atheist is when he's thankful and has no one to thank. Well, all these points do set us up for tonight's topic. So you just had to sit through one more introduction right now. Chivalry. G.K. Chesterton talked about chivalry. In fact, he said that he was the politest man in all of England because he could stand up on a bus and offer his seat to 3 women at one time. But I did a little looking up about what Chesterton writes about chivalry, and it's fascinating. He really puts it together, and he's, as he is in every topic, totally consistent across a writing career of over 35 years. So that what he says at the beginning of his writing career really matches up nicely with what he says at the end. He's sort of like Athena, that emerged fully formed from the head of Zeus. Chesterton was fully formed in many ways when he started his career as a writer. The thing he says about chivalry is that it is not an obvious idea. Chivalry is not an obvious idea. In fact, he says it's difficult to define. He defines it many different ways. He defines it as a reverence for weakness, or he defines it as Christian courage, a disdain of death, the moral attitude of a man with his back to the wall. He says, for the Catholic faith is always mixed up with the mystery of freedom, and love is always mixed up with the mystery of chivalry. And if you think about it, both faith and love are mixed up with the ideas of freedom and of chivalry. Every culture has to have a conception of life that makes it possible to live. But Chesterton says that Christendom has done infinitely more than other cultures. It has more of the idea of free will, more of the idea of a personal chivalry and charity, and more of the clean wind of hope. And he says that the paradox of chivalry or charity is that the weaker the thing is, the more it should be respected. That the more indefensible a thing is, the more it should appeal to us for a certain kind of defense. That's why we defend the unborn, for instance. But it's also especially why there's a special courtesy in chivalry that is extended to women. The damsel in distress, which of course brings up St. George, patron saint of England, whose day was 2 days ago? It was also Shakespeare's birthday, wasn't it? April 23rd. Also the day that Shakespeare died on April 23rd. April 23rd, big day. St. George. What do we know about St. George? Nothing. We don't know anything at all about him. That's one of the great things about having a saint like St. George to be your patron saint. Originally, he's known as a early Roman martyr, but somehow he turns into a knight who defeats a dragon in order to save a princess. That became his big story. Well, Chesterton says there's a reason for that. Because he says every romance has three characters. St. George, the princess, and the dragon. Those three characters are in every romance. The princess is the thing to be loved. The dragon is the thing to be fought. And St. George is the thing that loves and fights. And loving without fighting is simply lust. And fighting without loving is simply a dangerous form of horseplay that is occasionally fatal. Like 2 people laughed, that's good. So it's good, there's 3 people awake out there. I still might say something worthwhile, so the rest of you should still be paying attention. If you don't learn it, you're not going to remember it. But Chesterton's point about chivalry, even though he says every romance has those 3 characters, he says that chivalry is not romantic. It's actually realistic. It's the only realistic view of the sexes. He says St. George was probably more afraid of the princess than he was of the dragon. He says romance always consists of love and war, as does human life for all those wild people who prefer to love it. And these are the plain marks of the fighter: laughter, chivalry, and a contempt for anything cruel. Wherever there's chivalry, there's courtesy. And wherever there's courtesy, there's comedy. That's why the fighter is always ready to laugh. And that's why the lover is already ready to laugh. We always are able to laugh when we don't take ourselves too seriously. Angels fly because they take themselves lightly. Now, Chesterton says there's no better test of a man's ultimate chivalry and integrity than how he behaves when he's wrong. And one of the first people who behaved badly when they were wrong is one of the first people. Chesterton says, Adam, after the fall, loses his chivalry in a rather marked and startling manner. After all, he abandons not only God, but he abandons his lady in the same moment. And the rest of the story of mankind has been to try to gain those two things back, the two things that were lost at that moment. Not only the love of God, but the proper love of a woman. And we had to have a new Adam and a new Eve in order to achieve that. We had to have the Blessed Virgin Mary. And Chesterton points out that at the beginning of the Middle Ages, really even at the end of the Dark Ages, this growing devotion to Our Lady was what led to a higher respect for womanhood that went by the name of chivalry. And of course, it was connected to the rise of the most famous of all kings of England, the one who somehow escaped the English history books, but who exists in legend, King Arthur and his knights, all great examples of chivalry. And Chesterton's argument that Arthur was a real person because legend is something that is reliable. Legend, he says, is what everyone in the village believes, whereas history is what one person in the village believes who happens to have written it down. And he's probably a crank. And so he said we can actually rely on legend as telling us something that really happened. And his argument for the existence of a real King Arthur went against all scholarship at the time he wrote that in the early 20th century. But one person read that book, which was The Short History of England, and said, I'm going to find the real King Arthur. And that was a man by the name of Geoffrey Ashe, just passed away a few years ago, who did a bunch of research that not only found all the evidence that King Arthur really existed, but even found Arthur's grave. It found evidence that his bones were in the monastery at St. Glastonbury and were disposed of by King Henry's men when they destroyed the monastery. They destroyed King Arthur's bones. But Chesterton's main argument was that Arthur was so far back in history because it was before the recorded history. That's what the Dark Ages were. The Dark Ages refer to the fact there's very little recorded during that time. And he says, if you go far enough back in history, you get to the dawn of the light of the previous day. He said he clearly was someone who came from Rome and brought Roman civilization with him when he came to England. And that's who Arthur was. And that's pretty much what Geoffrey Ashe's research confirmed. And he was actually decorated by Queen Elizabeth for his work in contributing to English culture because of his discovery of the real Arthur. But yeah, what we get from the legend of the knights, the chivalry of the knights, is that they were following a standard that wasn't English, but was something above England. It was a standard outside of historical time, an eternal standard, a standard that comes from paradise itself. And knighthood, says Chesterton, originally was a title given to a man to further spur him in honor and bravery and chivalry. And chivalry is literally and completely forgotten by modern knights. The knighthood in our time is not as a rule given to a man before, but rather after he is fortunate. The whole point of knighthood was that The night should arrive late, but not too late. Had St. George not been late, there would have been no story. Had he been too late, there would have been no princess. Do you know what the term ESQ period means after someone's name? Yeah, but what does that mean? What am I doing under here? It means nothing at all in the modern terms. It's just added as it doesn't mean anything anymore. But yeah, when you said esquire, that's what I referred to someone who hadn't earned their spurs yet, okay? I'm going to read to you from The Everlasting Man, from the new annotated version that I created and did a commentary for it. And I'm going to donate this book to the Chesterton Reading Room at the end of this evening, if we ever get to the end of this evening. Yeah, going to read from it right now. All right. Okay. That isn't it. Okay. Out of some dark forest, under some ancient dawn, there must come towards us the lumbering yet dancing motions, one of the very queerest of all the prehistoric creatures. We must see for the first time the strangely small head set on a neck not only longer but thicker than itself, as the face of a gargoyle is thrust out upon a gutter spout. The one disproportionate crest of hair running along the ridge of that heavy neck like a beard in the wrong place. The feet, each like a solid club of horn, alone amid the feet of so many cattle, so that the true fear is to be found in showing not only the cloven, but the uncloven hoof. What's he describing? Who said horse? Not too many. What were the other ones? What'd you say? There wasn't a horse. Who said something other than a horse? Shark? Yeah, it is a horse, but only 4 of you held up your hands. Of course, you've all read the book before. So you're a bunch of cheaters. So the point is, when I read this passage to the Chesterton seniors, every 2 or 3 years, someone gets it right, guesses a horse. But they guess all kinds of other creatures. The whole point is that Chesterton is describing a horse exactly, but how do you describe a horse to someone who's never seen a horse? And the creature he's describing does fit that description. If we had to describe a horse to someone, we'd already refer to the fact that they've already seen a horse, and we'd use all these familiar images. And Chesterton's whole point in The Everlasting Man is that everyone thinks they understand Christianity, and they don't. They've only know the part that they've seen, and they've either reacted to it well or badly, but they haven't really seen all of it. They haven't backed up and looked at the whole horse. They haven't backed up and looked at the whole faith as the strange thing it is. But the whole point, it all starts in this book about first the history of man and then the history of the world with a horse. It starts with a horse. And the horse is part of chivalry. Chivalry is a horsey thing. Charging, swift, meaning that a man took his swiftest horse, whether to murder his enemy or forgive his enemy or to ask forgiveness of his enemy. And you, here at Wyoming Catholic, You guys do horses. You do chivalry probably better than just about any college in the country because you study horses firsthand, up close and personal. He says the very name of horse has been lifted up along with the name of man in the wildest fashion, in the very word that we use when we speak chivalry. The very name of horse has been given to the highest mood and moment of man. So we might almost say that the handsomest compliment of a man is to call him a horse. And chivalry is also associated with civilization itself. And the alternatives to civilization is not paganism, because paganism was very civilized. It's barbarism. The barbarian is the enemy of civilization, willfully at war with the principles by which human society has made possible hitherto. The man who cannot love, no, nor even hate his neighbor as himself. The man who does not believe in chivalry, in war or charity, in peace. Above all, he who does not believe in modesty in anything. Whatever he does, he overdoes. Barbarians live by appetite. And certainly all the economic theories of the modern world are based purely on appetite, on the struggle for bread. They are utterly godless and utterly uncivilized. They're beastly. And Chesterton writes about the barbarians in his epic poem, The Ballad of the White Horse. But he even, and of course, that's about a horse. He even shows a respect from the barbarians from the north, the Vikings, my people. He describes them as huge, hairy men. They were as trees walking the earth, as witless and as tall. That's the front line of the Minnesota Vikings right there. The Northmen came about our land, a Christless chivalry, who knew not of the arch or pen, great, beautiful, half-witted men from the sunrise and the sea. They came with a Christless chivalry. So they did come on horses, these barbarians. But they didn't know of the arch, they didn't know of architecture, and they didn't know of writing. And that's who Alfred has to fight off in order to save civilization and to save Christendom in England. And then, of course, there's another great epic poem by Chesterton that involves chivalry. And where's the Canadian contingency? Where are you seated this evening? Which one of you was going to come up here and recite the... Yes, it was you, wasn't it? You were going to come up and recite the stanza from Lepanto? Isn't this great? I've got a microphone here. I used to. But right here, use the microphone. And introduce yourselves.
Well, I'm Catherine Zadlowski.
And I am Noah Sauer.
And you are invaders from the Northland.
Well, I am, yes.
Okay, you are. All right.
Yes.
So they're gonna recite just one stanza from Lepanto, the stanza at the very end of the poem, after the battle has been fought, after Don Juan of Austria, the great knight, has defeated the Turks. Then there's this strange epilogue to the rest of the poem. Okay.
Cervantes, on his galley, sets the sword back in the sheath.
Don John of Austria rides homeward with the wreath. He sees across a weary land a straggling road in Spain, up which a lean and foolish knight forever rides in vain.
And he smiles,
but not as sultan smile, and settles back the blade. But Don John of Austria rides homeward from the crusade.
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. Cervantes, who died April 23rd. In fact, he died the exact same day that Shakespeare died. How cool is that? Cervantes lived the most romantic knightly life that you could imagine. Captured, kidnapped, held for ransom, escaped, fought in the Battle of Lepanto, was wounded so badly he could not use his hand for the rest of his life, but with his other hand went back to Spain and penned Don Quixote, which is about a foolish knight and makes fun of chivalry and says that the romantic life and the adventurous life is not possible after having lived it out himself. He makes fun of it, but the only reason you can make fun of it is because it's true. You can only laugh at the true things. Chesterton says the test of a good religion is whether we can laugh at it. Does Islam meet the test? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it does. But the evil romance, the opposite of the real romance, the evil romance puts a different motivation and a different source to our actions. It has given a soul to our race for wealth, and our worship of success is based on a false history, which pretends that Christendom was built by lawbreakers and not lawgivers, by robbery, not by chivalry, by pirates and not by priests. The worth of a civilization depends on which god it worships. And there was the great Roman civilization, the pre-Christian Roman civilization, that even though it was fighting with its own decline, recognized that there was a civilization that was more decadent than their own. A civilization that had great wealth and culture and art and high learning, but it threw its babies into a furnace to worship their god, Moloch. It sounds like the name of a god who eats babies, Moloch. And the Romans said Carthage must be destroyed. And they destroyed it. But Chesterton says in the 20th century, prophetically, Moloch is not fallen. Moloch is still in his high place. And his furnaces consume mankind. His armies overrun the earth. His ships threaten our land. The question on the lips of any living man is whether those who burn their children shall conquer those who don't. The parallel is quite justifiable. What we are fighting has all the regularity of a horrible religion. We are not at war with regrettable incidents or sad exceptions, but with a system like the system of sacrificing babies, a system of drowning neutrals, a system of enslaving civilians, a system of attacking hospitals, a system of exterminating chivalry. We are fighting against the odds. That's what chivalry does. It fights against the odds. And we always cheer on the underdog. We always side with the underdog because it's something we can't explain. It's a combination of pity and dramatic surprise, a desire for justice, a delight in the indeterminate, the things that we don't know what's going to happen. And it could be a lost cause, except as Christians, we do not believe there are any lost causes. We do not admit that there are any hopeless loyalties. We should come back to our religion at last if its temples were deserted as Stonehenge. It is this splendor of the hopeless hope, sometimes called the forlorn hope, which has made the peculiar chivalry of Christendom, which has given to us alone the true idea of romance. For the real romance was a combination of fidelity to the quest as a task with perpetual and enormous inequality to the task. Fidelity to the task and inequality to the task. Fidelity is the princess, inequality is the dragon. But we fight to defeat the dragon because we love the princess. And we don't give up. We don't give up. In conclusion, which of course are the best words in any talk, it gives you hope. Just when you're about to give up hope, you hear in conclusion, and you sit up. And yes, there is hope. I'd like to just quickly explain the title of this talk, because I think it's time that we do that. Night of the Holy Ghost. This was a title given to G.K. Chesterton. The poet Walter de la Mare wrote 4 lines of poetry that appeared on Chesterton's prayer card when he died. Night of the Holy Ghost, he goes his way. Wisdom his motley, truth his loving jest. The mills of Satan keep his lance in play. Pity and innocence, his heart at rest. Chesterton is a knight, and he's still at battle. He's still paradoxical. His apparent foolishness is actually wisdom. His joke is actually the truth. The devil doesn't get the joke. The dragon can't be taken seriously. But Chesterton's heart is at rest because he's compassionate and pure. And his very first book of poetry, called The Wild Knight, describes the kind of knight that Chesterton is. I ride forever seeking after God. God bless you.